Before we begin, please remember that I am not a medical doctor. This video is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. The information presented here is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any decisions about your health or treatment. Your health is your responsibility. Look in the mirror. Right now, the person you see looking back at you by 2026, they could be a complete stranger. For millions of Americans, that transformation won't come from a new diet, a new workout, or a newfound sense of willpower. It will come from a single weekly injection. A shot that has been called a miracle, a revolution, the end of obesity as we know it. We're talking, of course, about Wegovy. And the story you've been told about it is only half the truth. You've heard the promises. Effortless weight loss. The food noise in your head finally silenced. The freedom to wear the clothes you want, to move without pain, to look in the mirror and finally love what you see. Sounds like a dream, but what if the dream comes with a fine print nobody is reading? What if the miracle has a cost that isn't measured in dollars, but in long-term health consequences we are only just beginning to understand? This isn't another video telling you Wegovy is great, or Wegovy is terrible. This is the video they don't want you to see. This is the briefing you need before you, or someone you love, makes a decision that will alter the course of their life. Because in the next hour, I'm going to pull back the curtain on the entire GLP-1 industry. We're going to arm you with the unfiltered, unvarnished truth about what this drug does to your body, your brain, and your bank account. We're going to answer the questions your doctor might be too busy to answer, the questions the pharmaceutical ads deliberately ignore. What really happens in your stomach when you take this shot? Why are some people losing their hair and aging rapidly? A phenomenon now known as Ozempic face? What is muscle wasting? And why is it the single most dangerous side effect that almost no one is talking about? We'll cover the shocking connection between these drugs and your mental health, the reports of depression and anxiety that are quietly piling up, and we will tackle the billion-dollar question. What happens when you stop? Do you gain it all back? Is this a lifetime sentence? More importantly, we're looking ahead. This isn't just about Wegovy today. This is about the landscape in 2026. A world where even more powerful next-generation drugs will be on the market. A world where insurance companies are changing the rules of the game, potentially leaving millions of people stranded. A world where the long-term data, the stuff that takes years to collect, will finally start revealing the true consequences of rewiring our body's fundamental systems. If you are on Wegovy, considering Wegovy, or just trying to understand the biggest health revolution of our lifetime, this video is your essential guide. My promise to you is this: by the end of this presentation, you will know more than 99% of the population about these drugs. You will be able to have an intelligent, informed conversation with your doctor. You will be able to cut through the hype, the headlines, and the celebrity endorsements, and make the right decision for your life. Because let's be honest, you're here because you've been on a journey. A long, frustrating, and often lonely one. You've counted the calories. You've bought the gym memberships. You've tried keto, paleo, intermittent fasting. You've sworn off carbs, then fats, then sugar. You've felt that spark of hope with every new plan, only to feel the crushing weight of disappointment when the scale refuses to cooperate, or the weight comes roaring back the second you dare to live a normal life. You've felt the judgment in the eyes of others. You've felt the shame in the dressing room. You've felt your own body become a prison. And then you see a commercial, you hear a friend talking, you see a headline, and it whispers a promise of an easy way out, a scientific solution to a willpower problem. And it's tempting, isn't it? It's incredibly tempting to believe that one little pen, one click, one weekly injection can erase years of struggle. That's the story being sold. It's a powerful one. It's a multi-billion-dollar one. But it's a story with missing chapters. And today we're going to read every single one of them. We're going to start at the very beginning, not with the marketing but with the science. What is semaglutide, the active ingredient in Wegovy? How does it actually work? Most people think it just shrinks your appetite. That's not even close to the full picture. This drug doesn't just work on your stomach. It works on your brain. It fundamentally re-engineers the reward and satiety centers that have been driving your behavior for your entire life. It's a biological hack of the highest order. And when you hack a system as complex as the human body, there are always unintended consequences. Think of your body like a finely tuned orchestra. Every hormone, every organ, every signal is a different instrument playing in harmony. For decades, you've been trying to conduct this orchestra with a broken baton through sheer willpower. Wegovy comes in and doesn't just replace the baton, it rewires the entire symphony hall. It tells the violins to play quietly, it sends half the brass section home, and it puts the drums on a permanent delay. The result might sound quieter for a while, but it's no longer the music your body was designed to play. And over time, the musicians who are sent home, they get angry. The instruments forced to play quietly, they start to break. That metaphor is the key to understanding everything we're about to discuss. The food noise disappearing isn't just a quaint side effect. It's a sign of a fundamental neurological shift. The feeling of fullness isn't just your stomach being smaller. It's a state of near paralysis of your digestive tract, a process called delayed gastric emptying. The weight loss isn't just fat. For many, it's a catastrophic loss of lean muscle mass, the very engine that drives your metabolism and ensures a healthy old age. So we need to be clear-eyed. We need to be informed. This isn't about fear-mongering. It's about reality. It's about giving you the full 360-degree view. We'll celebrate the genuine, life-changing successes that many people have experienced. We'll hear from people whose lives have been saved by this medication, who have reversed their diabetes, who can now play with their grandchildren. Their stories are real and they are important. But we will also investigate the darker side, the stories that are suppressed, the people suffering from debilitating nausea, pancreatitis, and the terrifying diagnosis of stomach paralysis. We'll look at the financial toxicity of a drug that can cost over $15,000 a year, and the brutal reality of what happens when your insurance coupon runs out. By 2026, the world of weight loss will be unrecognizable. New players will be on the field. Drugs like tirzepatide and the upcoming retatrutide, which are even more powerful than Wegovy. The battle for your prescription will be a multi-trillion-dollar war fought by pharmaceutical giants. And you, the patient, will be right in the middle of it. The only defense you have is knowledge. So let's begin. Let's peel back the first layer of the onion. Let's go beyond the headlines and understand what this drug is, where it came from, and how it launched the single greatest medical and cultural shift of the 21st century. Let's talk about the lizard venom that started it all. That's right. The story of Wegovy, the drug that reshaped bodies, markets, and even our culture, doesn't start in a sterile multi-billion-dollar laboratory. It starts in the blistering heat of the American Southwest, with a reclusive, venomous lizard called the Gila monster. Now, the Gila monster is a fascinating creature. It's sluggish, it's brightly colored, a clear warning sign in nature, and its metabolism is an evolutionary masterpiece. It might only eat 3 or 4 massive meals a year. Think about that. It gorges itself, and then for months its body slowly processes that fuel, maintaining perfect blood sugar control the entire time. No spikes, no crashes. For a creature living in a world of feast or famine, it's the ultimate survival mechanism. For decades, scientists knew this. But it took a curious endocrinologist at a Bronx VA hospital in the early 1990s to ask the right question. Dr. John Ong wasn't a celebrity scientist with a massive grant. He was a dedicated researcher fascinated by hormones. He wondered, what if there was something in the Gila monster's venom that regulated its blood sugar so perfectly? What if that something could be used to help his human patients struggling with type 2 diabetes? So, he got his hands on some Gila monster venom, and sifting through its complex chemical cocktail, he isolated a hormone he named Exendin-4. And here is where the story pivots from the desert to human biology. Inside all of us, there's a crucial gut hormone called GLP-1, which stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. When you eat, your gut releases GLP-1. It's like a multitasker for your metabolism. It tells your pancreas, hey, release some insulin to handle the sugar from this meal. It tells your stomach, slow down. Let's not empty everything into the intestines at once. And most importantly for our story, it sends a signal to your brain's satiety center, the part that says, okay, you're full. You can stop eating now. It's a brilliant system, but it has one major flaw. The human body is incredibly efficient at cleaning up. Our natural GLP-1 is destroyed by an enzyme in our blood in less than 2 minutes. The I'm full signal is fleeting. It's a whisper, not a shout. Dr. Ng discovered that the lizard's hormone, Exendin-4, was shockingly similar to our own GLP-1. It fit into the same receptors in our bodies like a key into a lock. But there was one critical difference. The lizard's version was built to last. The same enzyme that obliterated our GLP-1 in minutes couldn't touch Exendin-4. It was resistant. Instead of lasting for 2 minutes, it could stick around for hours. Imagine you're "I'm full" signal wasn't a whisper that vanished almost instantly. Imagine it was a constant, steady message, humming in the background all day long. That was the power of the lizard venom. It was a supercharged, long-lasting version of our own natural satiety hormone. Dr. Ng patented his discovery, but big pharmaceutical companies were initially skeptical. The idea of a drug derived from lizard venom seemed like science fiction. For years, he struggled to find a partner. Finally, a small biotech company named Amylin Pharmaceuticals took a chance. They synthesized a version of Exendin-4, called it exenatide, and developed the first-ever drug in this new class, Byetta. Approved in 2005, Byetta was a game-changer for type 2 diabetes. It helped patients control their blood sugar like never before. But almost immediately, doctors and patients started noticing something else. A powerful, undeniable side effect. The weight was just melting off. People who had struggled for decades with weight gain, a common and frustrating complication of diabetes, were losing 10, 20, 30 pounds without radically changing their diets or lifestyles. They simply weren't as hungry. The food noise, that constant nagging chatter in your brain about your next meal, was gone. The drug was essentially turning up the volume on their body's natural "I'm full" signal and keeping it on. The pharmaceutical world snapped to attention. They had stumbled upon something monumental. The biggest unmet need in modern medicine wasn't just diabetes management. It was a safe and effective treatment for obesity itself. The side effect was the main event. But Byetta had a problem. Because exenatide still only lasted for a few hours, patients had to inject themselves twice a day, every single day. It was effective, but it was a huge commitment. The race was on to create a better, longer-lasting version. The next major leap came from the Danish pharmaceutical giant, Novo Nordisk. They engineered a new molecule called liraglutide. It was about 97% similar to human GLP-1, but with a clever modification, a fatty acid chain attached to its side. This tiny change acted like an anchor, allowing the molecule to bind to a protein in the blood called albumin. This protected it from being broken down so quickly. The result? A drug that only needed to be injected once a day. This became Victoza for diabetes. And seeing the incredible weight loss results, Novo Nordisk then packaged a higher dose of the same drug and got it approved specifically for weight loss in 2014. They called it Saxenda. This was a huge step forward. The world now had a daily injection specifically for obesity. But the holy grail was still out there. A once-a-week shot. A treatment so convenient that it could seamlessly integrate into a person's life. That's where semaglutide enters the picture. This was the true breakthrough. Scientists at Novo Nordisk went back to the drawing board with liraglutide. They made two more brilliant modifications to the molecule. These changes made it even more resistant to breakdown and strengthened its bond to that albumin protein in the blood. The effect was dramatic. The new molecule, semaglutide, had a half-life of 7 days. 168 hours. They had done it. They had created a weekly GLP-1. Initially, just like its predecessors, it was launched as a diabetes drug. In 2017, the world was introduced to Ozempic, a once-weekly injection to control blood sugar in adults with type 2 diabetes. And the results were stunning. Not only was it fantastic for blood sugar, but the weight loss was unlike anything they had ever seen before. In the clinical trials, the weight loss was so significant, so consistent, that it was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a side effect anymore. This was a blockbuster weight loss drug hiding in plain sight. So Novo Nordisk did exactly what they did with Saxenda. They ran massive new clinical trials, this time on people without diabetes, using an even higher dose of semaglutide. The results, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, were staggering. An average of 15% body weight loss. Some people lost over 20%. For a 250-pound person, that's a 50-pound loss from a weekly injection. Nothing in the history of obesity medicine had ever come close short of bariatric surgery. In June of 2021, the FDA gave its approval. This new higher-dose weekly semaglutide injection, specifically for chronic weight management, was given a new brand name, Wegovy. The science was proven. The drug was approved. A 4-decade journey from a lizard in the desert to a pen injector in a pharmacy was complete. But no one, not the scientists, not the doctors, not even Novo Nordisk itself, was prepared for what was about to happen next. They had created a medical marvel, but they were about to unleash a cultural tidal wave. The secret was out, and an unassuming diabetes drug was about to become the most famous, most desired, and most controversial brand name on the planet. And it started not with a bang but with a tweet. In October of 2022, a user on X, then known as Twitter, asked Elon Musk his secret for looking so fit, ripped, and healthy. The billionaire's reply was simple, direct, and devastatingly effective. He didn't say diet or exercise. He wrote, fasting and Wegovy. In that moment, a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical marketing campaign was rendered obsolete. The most powerful endorsement isn't one you pay for. It's one that feels like a shared secret. And Musk had just whispered it to the entire world. Suddenly, the floodgates didn't just open, they were blown off their hinges. The whispers that had been circulating in the elite circles of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street became a deafening roar. For months, people had been noticing the impossibly rapid transformations. Actors, producers, and reality stars who had struggled with their weight for years were suddenly appearing on red carpets looking impossibly svelte, their jawlines chiseled, their figures dramatically altered in a matter of weeks. The official line was always the same. A new personal trainer, a strict diet of chicken and broccoli, cutting out alcohol. But behind closed doors, everyone knew the truth. It was the shot, the skinny pen. It was the worst-kept secret in Beverly Hills. And now it wasn't a secret at all. The drug became the ultimate status symbol, more coveted than a Birkin bag or a front-row seat at Fashion Week. Comedians at the Oscars were joking about it. Andy Cohen was talking about it. The Kardashians, while never explicitly admitting it, became the unofficial poster children for the drug's transformative power. Their changing bodies fueling endless speculation and a million Google searches. Getting a prescription for Ozempic or Wegovy became a quiet badge of honor, a sign that you were in the know, that you had access. It wasn't just about losing weight anymore. It was about joining an exclusive club. Then, inevitably, the trend escaped the velvet ropes of Hollywood and landed squarely in the palm of everyone's hands. TikTok became ground zero for the GLP-1 explosion. The hashtag Ozempic journey racked up hundreds of millions of views. A new genre of content was born overnight. Young women and men, standing in their bathrooms, would unbox the sleek, sterile-looking injector pens as if it were the latest iPhone. They'd film themselves, sometimes wincing, sometimes laughing, as they administered their weekly shot. They documented every pound lost, every clothing size dropped, with a raw, confessional intimacy that was utterly captivating. These weren't celebrities with private chefs. They were ordinary people, and their results seemed just as miraculous. The before and after videos were hypnotic. A person's entire physical identity could seemingly be rewritten in 6 months. It created a powerful, almost irresistible narrative. This isn't a grueling, years-long battle anymore. This is a simple, weekly injection. This is a hack. A shortcut to the body you've always wanted. The message, amplified by the relentless TikTok algorithm, was clear. You can have this too. All you have to do is ask your doctor. And so, people did. In droves. The demand was unlike anything the pharmaceutical industry had ever seen for a non-life-saving drug. It was a cultural wildfire, and Novo Nordisk, the Danish company behind both Ozempic and Wegovy, was standing in the middle of it, holding a garden hose. They simply could not make it fast enough. The intricate manufacturing process, from synthesizing the semaglutide molecule to producing the sterile, high-tech injector pens, was a delicate, time-consuming dance. They couldn't just flip a switch and triple production. The result was a catastrophic rolling shortage that sent shockwaves through the entire healthcare system. And this is where the story takes a dark turn. Because while the media was focused on celebrities and TikTok trends, a quiet and desperate crisis was unfolding for the people the drug was originally made for. Type 2 diabetics. They would go to their pharmacy to pick up their monthly Ozempic prescription, a medication they relied on to control their blood sugar and prevent devastating long-term complications like blindness, kidney failure, and amputations, only to be told, "Sorry, we're out of stock. We have no idea when we're getting more." Imagine the terror of that moment. A medicine you need to manage a chronic, life-altering disease was being bought up by people who simply wanted to lose 15 pounds before a vacation. Pharmacies were put in an impossible position, having to ration their dwindling supplies. Doctors were inundated with frantic calls from patients whose blood sugar was spiraling out of control. An ugly, unspoken triage began to take place. Who deserved the drug more? The patient with an A1C of 9.5, or the socialite aiming for a size 0? The market had already answered that question. Whoever could get their hands on it first. This desperation created a vacuum, and as with any vacuum in a capitalist society, something rushed in to fill it. a shadowy, unregulated, and incredibly dangerous gray market. When the official supply chain failed, a new one was born in the digital back alleys of the internet. Compounding pharmacies, which are permitted to create custom versions of drugs during official shortages, began mixing their own batches of Semaglutide. The problem? No one knew what was actually in these vials. They weren't subject to the same rigorous FDA oversight. Some were found to contain a different, less tested version of the molecule. Others were found to have impurities, incorrect dosages, or even be contaminated with bacteria. It was a game of pharmaceutical roulette. People so desperate to get the drug were ordering these concoctions online, from pop-up websites and anonymous sellers on social media. They were injecting themselves with mystery liquids, hoping for the best. At the same time, a flood of counterfeit Ozempic and Wegovy pins hit the market. These fakes were masterfully done, with packaging and pins that were nearly indistinguishable from the real thing. But inside, instead of semaglutide, they might contain saline water or worse, insulin. Several people were hospitalized with life-threatening hypoglycemia after accidentally injecting themselves with massive, unprescribed doses of insulin from a counterfeit pen they thought was Ozempic. The dream of a miracle weight loss shot was, for some, turning into an absolute nightmare. Amidst the shortages and the black market chaos, the cultural conversation began to shift. The initial awe and excitement started to curdle into suspicion and critique. The term Ozempic face entered the lexicon, describing the gaunt, hollowed-out look that can result from rapid fat loss in the face, making people look prematurely aged. The body positivity movement, which had fought for years to promote acceptance of all body sizes, saw these drugs as a devastating step backward, a high-tech tool that reinforced the toxic idea that thinness is the ultimate prize. The debate grew louder and more polarized. Was this really a medical breakthrough for public health? Or was it just anorexia in a pen, as some critics called it? Was it a legitimate treatment for the complex disease of obesity? Or was it a form of medicalized cheating, a way to bypass the hard work of diet and exercise? The drug was no longer just a drug. It had become a cultural symbol, a flashpoint for our deepest anxieties about weight, beauty, health, and willpower. The world was dividing into two camps: those who saw Wegovy as a miracle, and those who saw it as a menace. And the medical community itself was just as divided, grappling with a powerful new tool whose long-term effects were still largely unknown. The tidal wave had hit, and now everyone was left sorting through the wreckage, wondering if the cure was actually becoming part of the disease. And one of the first places this new disease began to fester was in the economy itself. The sheer staggering cost of putting millions of Americans on a lifelong multi-thousand-dollar-a-year medication started to create cracks in the very foundation of our healthcare system. By 2024, insurers were already sounding the alarm. They had initially approved the drug for severe cases, but the demand had exploded far beyond their models. It wasn't just for diabetes or extreme obesity anymore. It was for anyone with a BMI over 27 with a related condition. That's tens of millions of people. The math was brutal and unsustainable. State employee health plans, some of the largest in the country, saw their pharmacy costs skyrocket by double-digit percentages in a single year, almost entirely driven by GLP-1 drugs. They were faced with an impossible choice: hike premiums for everyone, the healthy, the sick, everyone, or start restricting access. They chose to restrict, and so began the great insurance wars of the mid-2020s. Suddenly, getting a Wegovy prescription wasn't a simple doctor's visit. It became a gauntlet. The term prior authorization went from an annoying piece of industry jargon to a household curse word. Insurers demanded mountains of paperwork. Patients had to prove they had failed on multiple other, cheaper weight loss drugs first, a process called step therapy. They needed documented attempts at diet and exercise, notes from nutritionists, sometimes even psychological evaluations. It was a bureaucratic wall designed to make people give up. And for many it worked. Stories flooded online forums of people who had lost 50, 60, 70 pounds, who felt healthy for the first time in their lives, only to have their insurance renewal denied. They were cut off cold turkey, left with the terrifying prospect of the weight returning. This created a new and particularly cruel American class divide. It wasn't just about wealth anymore. It was a two-tiered system of the body. On one side, you had those with top-tier corporate insurance plans or the personal wealth to pay the $1,500 a month cash price. They could stay on the drug, maintain their weight loss, and live in this new reality. On the other side were the vast majority of people, those on less generous plans, gig workers, the underinsured. They were left looking through the glass, tantalizingly close to a solution they simply couldn't access or afford long-term. The resentment was palpable. It created a bizarre social dynamic where a person's physique could inadvertently signal their socioeconomic status. The very people the drug could theoretically help the most, those in lower-income brackets who suffer disproportionately from obesity-related diseases, were the ones most often locked out. And where there is desperation and demand, a shadow market always emerges. The black market for semaglutide exploded. It was the Wild West. Websites based in China and Eastern Europe began selling vials of raw semaglutide powder, a substance meant for laboratory research, not human injection. People would buy it along with bacteriostatic water and insulin syringes, and watch YouTube videos to learn how to mix their own doses in their kitchens. The risks were astronomical. There was no quality control, no guarantee of purity or correct dosage. Horror stories began to surface. Severe infections from contaminated vials, hospitalizations from accidental overdoses, and people injecting completely useless, counterfeit substances. Then there were the compounding pharmacies, seizing on a legal loophole that allows them to replicate drugs during official shortages. These pharmacies began churning out their own versions of semaglutide. While many were reputable, the space was largely unregulated. The FDA issued warnings, but it was like playing whack-a-mole. Some of these compounded versions were mixed with different salts or chemicals, leading to different side effects and unknown long-term consequences. People were so desperate to get or stay on the drug that they were willing to roll the dice on these unregulated alternatives, injecting mystery concoctions into their bodies, all in pursuit of the promise they'd been sold. But even for those who had legitimate, stable access to the drug, a different, more subtle kind of wreckage was becoming apparent. The psychological impact. The drug's most celebrated feature was its ability to silence food noise, that constant, nagging internal monologue about eating, calories, and cravings. For millions, this was pure liberation. The mental prison was gone. But for a significant minority, the silence was deafening. They described a strange and unsettling sense of anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. Food, a source of joy, culture, and social bonding for all of human history, had become nothing. It was just fuel. They reported feeling disconnected at family dinners, uninterested in going out to restaurants with friends. The joy of a perfectly cooked steak or a shared dessert was gone, replaced by a dull functional necessity to just get some protein in. This was the Wegovy paradox. In its quest to fix our dysfunctional relationship with food, it sometimes simply erased the relationship altogether. It didn't teach moderation. It enforced apathy. This led to a new kind of social awkwardness. How do you bond with colleagues when you have no interest in happy hour? How do you celebrate a birthday when the cake holds zero appeal? Some users described a feeling of being a ghost at the feast, physically present but mentally and emotionally detached from a core human experience. They had lost the weight, but they worried they had lost a piece of their personality, a part of their soul, along with it. And beneath all of this, the cost, the access, the black market, the psychological shifts, loomed the single biggest, most terrifying question of all. The one that Novo Nordisk's own studies had hinted at, and that was now becoming a brutal reality for the first wave of users. What happens when you stop? The initial data was clear. If you stop taking the drug, you will almost certainly regain the weight. But the clinical trials didn't capture the sheer velocity and ferocity of the rebound. People who were forced to stop, either by their insurance or by the cost, described a nightmare scenario. The food noise didn't just come back. It came back with a vengeance, like a starving animal finally uncaged. The hunger was ravenous, insatiable, and the weight returned with shocking speed. Many people reported gaining back everything they had lost and then some within a year. This wasn't just a physical failure. It was a profound psychological blow. They had tasted freedom, only to be dragged back into their old prison. A prison whose walls now felt thicker and more inescapable than ever before. It raised the horrifying possibility that Wegovy wasn't a cure at all. It was a subscription. A lifelong, incredibly expensive subscription to feeling normal. And if you couldn't make your monthly payments, the consequences were devastating. The tidal wave hadn't just left wreckage. It had created a powerful undertow, pulling people back out to see the moment they thought they had finally reached the shore. And for millions, this undertow was more than just a metaphor. It was a biological betrayal. The initial victory, the shedding of pounds that had clung to them for years, felt like a permanent conquest. They had done the work, followed the regimen, and their bodies had responded. They believed they had retrained their systems, forged new habits, and fundamentally changed their relationship with food. But they hadn't changed their biology, they had only suppressed it. And now the biology was fighting back with a vengeance. The first sign was subtle, a whisper of a craving for something they hadn't thought about in months. Then the portion sizes that had felt so satisfying a few weeks ago suddenly left them feeling empty. The constant, nagging internal monologue about food, the food noise that Wegovy had so miraculously silenced, began to creep back in. First it was a background hum, then it became a conversation. Soon it was a full-blown shouting match inside their own heads, and they were losing the argument. What was happening was a physiological storm. You see, semaglutide, the active ingredient in Wegovy, works by mimicking a hormone called GLP-1. It tells your brain you're full, it slows down how fast your stomach empties, and it helps regulate your blood sugar. It's like having a highly effective manager overseeing your body's entire energy intake department. It keeps everything running smoothly, quietly, and efficiently. But when you stop the injections, you don't just fire the manager. You fire the entire department and chaos ensues. The body, having been in a state of caloric deficit for a prolonged period, panics. From an evolutionary perspective, significant weight loss is a threat to survival. Your body doesn't know you're trying to fit into a smaller pair of jeans. It thinks you're starving in the wilderness. So it activates every single survival mechanism it has to regain that weight, which it sees as a vital energy reserve. The hunger hormone, ghrelin, which had been sleeping on the job, suddenly gets a quadruple shot espresso and comes roaring back to life. Your metabolism, which had already slowed down to conserve energy during weight loss, a process known as metabolic adaptation, now works against you, burning calories more sluggishly than ever before. It's a perfect storm for rapid weight regain. People weren't just returning to their old habits. Their bodies were actively conspiring against their best intentions. The same meal that would have been satisfying before now felt like an appetizer. The urge to eat wasn't just a psychological desire. It was a deep, primal biological command. It felt like a civil war with their conscious mind, the part that remembered the joy of mobility and the confidence of better health, fighting a losing battle against a powerful ancient force deep within their own DNA. And the psychological toll of this rebound was, for many, even more devastating than the initial weight problem. They were hit with a tidal wave of shame. Friends and family would make comments. "I guess it didn't stick," they'd say with a hint of pity, or worse, a smug "I told you so" tone. Doctors, some of whom had celebrated the initial success, now looked at their charts with disappointment, sometimes suggesting the patient simply lacked willpower. But this wasn't about willpower. It was like trying to hold back a flood with a single sandbag. The data from the original clinical trials had shown this all along. In the Step 1 trial, one of the key studies for Wegovy's approval, participants who stopped the medication after 68 weeks regained, on average, 2/3 of the weight they had lost within the following year. It was right there in the scientific literature, a footnote in the success story. The drug worked wonderfully as long as you kept taking it. This was the brutal truth that emerged from the wreckage of 2025. Wegovy wasn't a cure. It was a treatment. It wasn't a vaccine for obesity. It was a lifelong management tool, like insulin for a diabetic or blood pressure medication for someone with hypertension. The problem was, it hadn't been marketed or understood that way by the public. The cultural narrative was one of a magic bullet, a reset button. You take it, you lose the weight, you learn better habits, and you're done. The reality was a life sentence, a subscription to a new self. This realization created a new kind of desperation. People who had tasted the freedom of a lighter, healthier body were now terrified of losing it. They saw the pounds creeping back on the scale, felt their clothes getting tighter, and experienced the return of aches and pains they had forgotten. They were faced with an impossible choice. Either accept the weight regain and the return of all the associated health risks and social stigma, or find a way anyway to get back on the medication. And so, the second wave began. Not a wave of new users, but a wave of returning veterans, now armed with the terrifying knowledge that stopping was not an option. They weren't just seeking a drug anymore. They were seeking a permanent lifeline. This fundamentally changed the conversation, shifting it from a short-term solution to a long-term, potentially lifelong dependency. The pharmaceutical companies, of course, were prepared for this. The concept of maintenance doses became the new buzzword. The idea was to transition patients from a weight loss dosage to a lower, long-term dosage designed to simply keep the weight off. It was a brilliant business model, transforming a one-time customer into a subscriber for life. For the patients, however, it was a daunting proposition. It meant committing to weekly injections indefinitely, It meant budgeting thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars per year every year for the rest of their lives. And it meant accepting that their body's new normal was now dependent on a steady supply of a powerful synthetic hormone. This raised a whole new set of terrifying questions. What were the truly long-term effects of taking a GLP-1 agonist for 20, 30, or even 40 years? The initial trials were extensive, but they only lasted a couple of years. No one in 2026 knew what this would do to a person's pancreas, their thyroid, or their digestive system over the course of a lifetime. Whispers and early-stage studies began to circulate about unforeseen consequences, creating a deep undercurrent of anxiety within the medical community and among long-term users. They had solved one problem, the weight, only to find themselves potentially tethered to a dozen new ones they couldn't yet see. They had escaped the prison of obesity, but many began to wonder if they had simply traded it for a gilded cage, one with a very, very high monthly rent. And that rent wasn't just paid in dollars. By 2024, a disturbing new currency was emerging, one paid in joy, in connection, and in the very essence of what it meant to experience one of life's most fundamental pleasures. The first whispers of this came not from clinical studies, but from Reddit threads and private Facebook groups. The posts all had a similar haunting theme. Does food taste like nothing to anyone else? Or, I used to love my mom's lasagna. Last night I ate it and felt bored. At first, these were dismissed as minor side effects, a small price to pay for a new life. But the whispers grew into a roar. It wasn't just that people weren't hungry, it was that the reward was gone. The entire dopamine-driven feedback loop that makes a perfectly grilled steak or a decadent piece of chocolate cake a source of profound satisfaction had been muted. It was as if the world's flavor had been turned down from vibrant technicolor to a dull, washed-out gray. Think about it. Food isn't just fuel. It's the centerpiece of our celebrations. It's the birthday cake, the Thanksgiving turkey, the first date dinner, the comfort soup when you're sick. It's how we connect, how we mourn, how we love. Now imagine sitting at a table with your family, everyone laughing and enjoying a holiday meal, and you feel nothing. You chew the food mechanically, not because you want it, but because it's what you're supposed to do. You feel a profound sense of alienation, a pane of glass between you and everyone else. You are there, but you are not part of it. This was the new reality for a significant portion of long-term Wegovy users. They had lost the weight, but in the process they had lost the language of human connection they never even knew they were speaking. The drug hadn't just hijacked their appetite, it had hijacked their culture. This led to an even more insidious problem, one that therapists began calling the Great Unmasking. For decades, millions of people had used food to cope, to soothe anxiety, to numb depression, to fill a void of loneliness. They called it emotional eating, and it was the primary driver of their obesity. Wegovy and its sister drugs silenced what users called the food noise, that constant, nagging internal monologue about what to eat next, the guilt over what you just ate, the planning, the craving, the obsession. On the surface, this silence was a miracle. It was freedom. But for many, that silence was terrifying, because when the roar of the food noise faded, they were left alone in a quiet room with the very demons they had been trying to eat into submission. The anxiety was still there, now raw and unfiltered. The depression had a newfound clarity. The loneliness was sharper than ever. Food had been their medication, their dysfunctional, damaging, but ultimately effective coping mechanism. And the drug had taken it away, offering nothing in its place. People who had spent their lives battling one monster, their weight, were now forced to confront a host of others they never knew were lurking in the shadows. While this psychological reckoning was taking place, a parallel crisis was unfolding within the body itself. The early concerns about muscle loss, what we talked about before, turned out to be just the tip of a catastrophic iceberg. By 2025, endocrinologists and geriatric specialists, doctors who study aging, were sounding a 5-alarm fire. The data was undeniable. A shocking number of patients on long-term GLP-1 agonists were experiencing a rapid-onset version of sarcopenia, the debilitating loss of muscle mass typically seen in the elderly. A 40-year-old on Wegovy for 2 years could have the muscle composition and, more frighteningly, the metabolic profile of a 70-year-old. They looked thin, yes. They fit into smaller jeans, yes. But on a biological level, they were aging at a terrifyingly accelerated rate. This wasn't just about being weaker or looking less toned. This was a full-scale assault on their long-term health. Muscle is our metabolic engine. It's what burns calories even at rest. It's what helps regulate blood sugar. It's what keeps our bones strong and our bodies stable. As patients lost this crucial tissue, their basal metabolic rate, the number of calories their body burns just to stay alive, plummeted. This meant that their body was becoming dramatically more efficient at storing fat. They were transforming themselves into the perfect machine for weight regain. Furthermore, this loss of muscle and bone density was creating a silent epidemic of what doctors called sarcopenic obesity. They were skinny fat. They had a normal BMI but a disastrously high body fat percentage, with fat accumulating around their organs. They were, in essence, trading one major health risk for another, more hidden one. They were becoming metabolically broken, fragile, and set up for a future of insulin resistance, osteoporosis, and a dramatic increase in the risk of falls and fractures later in life. And this created the ultimate trap. The gilded cage slammed shut. Imagine you've been on Wegovy for 18 months. You've lost 80 pounds. But the side effects are wearing on you. The joylessness of eating, the constant low-grade nausea, the social isolation. And then there's the cost, over $1,000 a month that your insurance has decided it will no longer cover. So you decide, I've learned new habits. I'm ready. I'm going to stop. What happens next for the vast majority of people is a biological nightmare. The moment the drug is out of your system, it's like a dam breaking. The GLP-1 hormone that the drug was mimicking is no longer flooding your system. Your brain's hunger and reward centers, which have been artificially suppressed for years, roar back to life with a vengeance. The food noise you thought was gone forever returns, but now it's not a voice, it's a deafening primal scream. The cravings are more intense than you have ever experienced in your life. It's not just hunger. It's a deep cellular ravenous need to consume. But here's the cruel twist. You are now facing this unprecedented onslaught of hunger, with a broken metabolism. Your body, with its depleted muscle mass, now burns hundreds of fewer calories per day than it did before you even started the drug. So you eat what feels like a normal amount of food, the amount a person your size should eat, and the weight piles on faster than you can believe. 10 pounds in a month, 20, 30. It's a runaway train and you have no brakes. And the weight that returns is not the same as the weight you lost. You lost fat and precious muscle. You regain almost exclusively fat. You end up heavier than when you started, but with a much worse body composition, a slower metabolism, and now the psychological trauma of having reached your goal, only to have it savagely ripped away. You are left with one choice. Get back on the drug for life, or face a battle with your own biology that you are almost guaranteed to lose. This was the reality that millions were waking up to in 2025. They weren't patients being treated for a condition. They were subscribers locked into a pharmaceutical dependency with no clear exit strategy. The gilded cage wasn't just uncomfortable. For many, it was starting to feel like a life sentence. But even this horrifying physical and financial trap wasn't the full story. Researchers were beginning to see that the drug's influence went far beyond the gut and the hunger centers of the brain. It was touching something deeper, something fundamental to motivation, desire, and drive itself. And what they were finding would redefine our understanding of these drugs entirely. To understand what was happening, we have to look past the stomach and into the most complex machine in the known universe, the human brain. Specifically, we need to talk about the reward system. Think of it as the engine of motivation. It's a primitive, powerful network of circuits, honed by millions of years of evolution, designed to do one thing: make you repeat behaviors that are good for survival. When you eat a high-calorie meal, find a mate, or achieve a difficult goal, this system floods your brain with a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine isn't just the pleasure chemical. That's a massive oversimplification. It's the motivation chemical. It's the chemical of wanting, of seeking, of craving. It's the neurological whisper that says, hey, that was good. Remember it. Do it again. This system is what drove our ancestors to hunt for one more berry bush, to take risks for a greater reward. It's what drives us today to work for a promotion, to swipe on a dating app, or to reach for a second slice of pizza. It is the very essence of our drive. And scientists discovered that GLP-1 receptors weren't just scattered in the gut. They were sitting directly inside the key command centers of this ancient reward pathway, in places like the nucleus accumbens, the brain's pleasure and motivation hub. It was like finding a secret control panel wired directly into the engine of human desire. And when Wegovy activated these receptors, it wasn't just telling the stomach it was full. It was telling the very core of the brain's motivation system to quiet down. This is where we get to the phenomenon that has become the defining, almost mystical experience of being on these drugs. It's a concept that people who've never experienced it struggle to comprehend, and those who have struggled to explain. They call it the silencing of food noise. What is food noise? It's the constant, uninvited internal monologue about food that millions of people live with every single day. It's a relentless background hum of obsession. It's waking up and your first thought being, what can I eat for breakfast? I shouldn't have carbs. Maybe just a protein shake. But I really want a bagel. It's sitting in a meeting unable to focus because you're mentally debating whether you'll have the salad or the sandwich for lunch. It's the voice that says, you've been good all day, you deserve that cookie. Followed immediately by the voice of guilt that says, you're going to regret this. It's the planning, the negotiating, the calorie counting, the bargaining, the craving, the resisting, and the eventual surrender. It is an exhausting, never-ending mental war, fought meal by meal, snack by snack, minute by minute. For people who live with it, it's not a choice. It's the default setting of their brain. Then they take a shot of semaglutide. And a few days or weeks later, they notice something strange. Silence. The noise is just gone. The constant chatter about food vanishes. It's not that they can't eat or that food tastes bad. It's that food has lost its power over them. It's been demoted from a central obsession to a simple necessity. They can look at a donut and feel nothing. Not a craving they have to fight, just a neutral observation. That is a donut. They can eat half a sandwich and feel satisfied, then put the other half away for later without a second thought, an act that would have been previously unthinkable. It's a liberation so profound that people describe it in almost spiritual terms. They talk about having their brain back. They suddenly have all this free mental real estate, this cognitive bandwidth that was previously occupied 24/7 by the food war. They can focus on their work, be more present with their families, and pursue hobbies, all because the tyrant in their head has been dethroned. This single effect, the silencing of food noise, is arguably more powerful than the drug's purely metabolic effects. It's not just treating the body, it's rewiring the mind. But the story doesn't end with food, because if this drug can turn down the volume on the brain's reward signal for a cheeseburger, what else can it do? The brain doesn't have a separate dopamine system for food, another for alcohol, and another for gambling. It has one unified reward system, and the anecdotal reports started flooding in, far outpacing the clinical trials. People were reporting that their desire to drink alcohol had simply evaporated. The nightly glass of wine they'd had for a decade suddenly seemed unappealing. Lifelong smokers found they were forgetting to have a cigarette. Compulsive shoppers walked past a sale without a second glance. People with dermatillomania, a compulsive skin-picking disorder, realized their hands were calm. Nail-biters saw their nails growing for the first time in their lives. The whispers were getting louder. This wasn't a weight loss drug. This was a desire drug, or more accurately, an anti-desire drug. The mechanism began to make sense. When you engage in a rewarding behavior, whether it's eating a cookie, having a drink, or winning a bet, your brain gets that dopamine hit. That hit is what reinforces the behavior and makes you want to do it again. Wegovy and its sister drugs appear to blunt that response. The cookie still tastes sweet, the wine still tastes fine, but the neurological reward is diminished. The aha moment in the brain, the do that again signal, is muffled. Over time, without that constant positive reinforcement, the craving starts to fade. The learned association between the activity and the intense reward weakens and eventually breaks. The drug isn't blocking the pleasure. It's uncoupling the pleasure from the motivation. It's subtly re-educating the brain about what is truly worth wanting. This was a seismic shift in understanding. The implications were staggering. We had stumbled upon a molecule that seemed to be a master key to the very circuitry that governs our deepest cravings and compulsions. It was a tool that could potentially help millions of people break free from the chains of addiction, not just to food, but to a whole host of destructive behaviors. The potential for good was immense, but it also opened a new, more unsettling line of questioning. The reward system doesn't just drive our vices, it also drives our virtues. It's the source of ambition, the fire of passion, the thrill of discovery, the joy of connection. It's what makes us strive, create, and love. So, the terrifying multi-billion-dollar question became, if you turn down the volume on desire itself, what else gets turned down with it? If you blunt the reward for the bad, do you inevitably blunt the reward for the good? We were no longer just talking about side effects like nausea. We were beginning to ask if one of the side effects of silencing your demons was silencing your angels too. This question, once a philosophical whisper, became the central obsession of neuroscientists and endocrinologists by late 2024. The answer, it turns out, was hiding in plain sight. deep within the brain's most ancient and powerful reward circuitry. You see, the magic of Wegovy, its ability to silence the food noise, wasn't just happening in the gut. It was staging a quiet coup in the capital city of your desires, the dopamine system. Think of dopamine as the currency of motivation. It's not actually the pleasure molecule, it's the pursuit molecule. It's the chemical that says, hey, do that again. That was good for our survival. It's the surge you get when you're about to eat a delicious meal, the anticipation before a winning bet, the thrill of seeing a notification from someone you like. It's the engine of want. GLP-1 receptors, the very things Wegovy targets, aren't just in your pancreas. They are peppered throughout your brain's reward pathway, particularly in a region called the nucleus accumbens. When you take Wegovy, the semaglutide doesn't just tell your stomach you're full. It crosses the blood-brain barrier and tells your reward center, hey, we're good. No need to get so excited about that pizza. We've got plenty of energy. It essentially turns down the volume on the dopamine signal associated with food. The craving isn't just ignored. In many cases, it never even broadcasts. And for millions, this was a miracle. The war was over. But the brain isn't a precise surgical theater. It's more like a Jackson Pollock painting. You can't just turn down the volume on one station without affecting the whole sound system. The dopamine pathway that makes you crave a cheeseburger is the very same pathway that makes you crave a glass of wine after a long day, or the thrill of a slot machine, or the high of a new purchase. It's all the same neurochemical currency. And so, the stories began to pour in, moving from niche Reddit threads to mainstream news by 2025. They were stranger, and in some ways, more profound than the early reports of nausea. There was the day trader in Chicago who said he just lost the nerve. The exhilarating highs and terrifying lows of the market that had been his lifeblood for a decade now felt muted, gray. He no longer felt the compulsion to chase the wind. He also stopped losing money. But he told a reporter he felt like he'd lost his favorite color. There was the amateur painter in Oregon, a woman who had filled hundreds of canvases over her lifetime. After 6 months on a GLP-1 agonist, she found herself walking past her studio, not with a sense of dread or a block, but with simple, uncomplicated indifference. The urgent, burning need to create, to mix colors and make a mark had just evaporated. The silence she'd craved in her kitchen had followed her into her art studio. We saw it everywhere. The compulsive online shopper who could suddenly scroll past a flash sale without a flicker of interest. The lifelong nail-biter who looked down one day to find perfectly formed cuticles, with no memory of having consciously stopped. The man who quit a 2-pack-a-day smoking habit of 40 years, not through grit and willpower, but because he just forgot to want a cigarette. On one hand, this was revolutionary. Researchers at Stanford and Johns Hopkins began publishing trial after trial in 2025, confirming what the anecdotes suggested. Semaglutide and its successors were stunningly effective at treating alcohol use disorder, gambling addiction, and even compulsive behaviors like skin picking. They were hailed as a potential cure for the very concept of addiction. But on the other hand, a darker, more complex picture was emerging. For a subset of users, this dampening effect didn't stop at the destructive impulses. Kept going. It began to touch the things that gave their lives texture and meaning. The joy of live music, the excitement of planning a vacation, the flirtatious spark with a partner, the drive to get that promotion at work. The clinical term for this is anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. But for most it wasn't that dramatic. It was more subtle. Amedonia, a slow, creeping flattening of the emotional landscape. By 2026, this is no longer a fringe theory. It's a recognized, though not universal, side effect. The FDA is now mandating that pharmaceutical companies running trials for new weight loss drugs include what they call motivational and effective scoring to measure these changes. We now understand that these drugs place people on a spectrum. On one end, you have the ideal user. Their destructive cravings are silenced, but their healthy passions remain untouched. They stop wanting the third glass of wine but still cherish the first. In the middle, you have the majority of users, a general quieting of all desires, both good and bad, but a trade-off they are more than willing to make for their health. But on the far end of that spectrum, there is a small but significant percentage of people for whom the volume is turned down too low. They are losing weight, their blood sugar is perfect, but they feel like they are living life in grayscale. They are haunted by the silence, by the absence of the very drives that, for better or worse, made them feel alive. The question for medicine in 2026 is no longer if this happens, but how to predict who it will happen to. Is it genetic? Is it tied to a person's baseline dopamine levels? And this leads us to the biggest question of all, a question that has moved beyond the doctor's office and into the halls of sociology and economics. What does it mean for a society when, in the near future, 10, 20, or even 30% of its population is taking a medication that subtly blunts ambition, risk-taking, and passionate impulse? What happens to innovation when the obsessive, all-consuming drive that fuels entrepreneurs and artists is pharmacologically discouraged? What is the collective cost of silencing our demons? If the price is the muting of our most creative and ambitious angels, we had solved a biological problem of excess. But in doing so, we had stumbled into a philosophical crisis of desire itself. We were so focused on the psychology of it all, on the brain, on motivation and mood. We spent years debating the soul of the drug, but all the while, we were missing something far more fundamental. We forgot that the body keeps its own score. And as the first wave of long-term users, the pioneers from the early 2020s, entered their 5th, 6th, and 7th year on these medications, a new set of alarms began to sound. These alarms weren't coming from the mind, but from the very building blocks of the body itself. The alarm was sarcopenia, the insidious, creeping loss of muscle mass. And its even more dangerous twin, osteoporosis, the hollowing out of our bones. For years, the focus had been on the number on the scale, the pounds shed, the inches lost. Everyone celebrated the shrinking waistlines, but almost no one was measuring what was happening to the body's essential architecture, the lean tissue and skeletal framework that supports our every move. The problem wasn't the weight loss itself. It was the nature of the weight loss. When you lose weight rapidly, especially through extreme caloric restriction, your body doesn't just burn fat. It's not that selective. It cannibalizes muscle tissue for energy too. And when you're not eating enough, you're often not getting enough protein and calcium to maintain bone density. For someone losing 20 or 30 pounds, this was a manageable issue. But for the super responders, the people who lost 100 pounds or more and stayed on the drugs for years, the cumulative effect was profound. They were building a beautiful new house, but they were using the materials from the foundation to do it. Consider the case of a woman from Austin, Texas. We'll call her Jennifer. In 2021, at 45 years old, she was one of the first to get a prescription for Wegovy. For her, it was a miracle. The food noise that had tormented her for decades vanished overnight. She lost 90 pounds in 18 months. Her blood pressure normalized. Her prediabetes reversed. She became an evangelist for the drug, a walking billboard for its transformative power. By 2026, she looked fantastic. She wore clothes she hadn't fit into since college, but she felt fragile. She got tired walking up a single flight of stairs, even though she was 90 pounds lighter. Her grip felt weak. One afternoon, while carrying groceries, she tripped on a perfectly flat sidewalk. It wasn't a dramatic fall. It was a simple stumble. But she felt a sickening, sharp crack in her hip. A 50-year-old woman with the bone fracture of an 85-year-old. Jennifer's story, and thousands like it, began to paint a disturbing picture. Doctors started seeing a pattern. Patients who had been on GLP-1s for 4 or 5 years were presenting with symptoms of advanced aging. Not wrinkles and gray hair, but functional aging. A loss of strength, a decline in mobility, an alarming increase in fractures from minor falls. The very drug that was supposed to extend their healthy lifespan seemed to be paradoxically accelerating a different kind of decay. This wasn't a side effect you could find on a warning label, because it wasn't a direct effect of the drug itself. It was a second-order consequence of its incredible efficacy. The medicine worked too well at suppressing appetite. It made it easy for people to exist in a prolonged state of malnutrition, a state where they were consuming too few of the essential building blocks needed to maintain their body's core structure. The medical community had to scramble. Researchers who had been focused on metabolic benefits suddenly pivoted to musculoskeletal health. Studies published throughout 2025 confirmed the trend. DEXA scans, which measure body composition and bone density, became a standard part of long-term GLP-1 therapy. The results were often shocking. Patients who had a healthy BMI on paper were revealed to have a body composition that was dangerously skewed. Low muscle mass and porous bones hidden beneath a thin layer of remaining fat. They were diagnosed with a condition that sounded like a mouthful but was terrifyingly simple: osteosarcopenic obesity. They were, in effect, becoming skinny frail. This revelation sent a shockwave through the pharmaceutical industry. The narrative of a simple weekly injection for weight loss was shattered. This was far more complex. Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, the titans of the industry, were forced to react. Their initial response was to double down on lifestyle advice, funding massive public awareness campaigns about the critical importance of resistance training and high-protein diets for anyone on their medications. Patient starter kits began to include not just injection pens, but resistance bands and vouchers for consultations with dietitians. The message shifted from "take this shot to lose weight" to "this shot is a tool, but you must actively build your body while you use it." But they knew that advice alone wasn't enough. The real race, the multi-trillion-dollar race, was for the next generation of drugs. The solution wasn't to make GLP-1s less effective, but to add something to them, to create a cocktail in a single injection. The Holy Grail became a combination therapy. One molecule to suppress appetite and control blood sugar, and another to actively preserve or even build muscle mass. Drugs with names like myostatin inhibitors and activin receptor antagonists, once confined to the niche world of bodybuilding and rare muscle-wasting diseases, suddenly became the hottest properties in pharma. By 2026, several of these GLP-1+ drugs were in late-stage clinical trials. The promise was tantalizing. All the weight loss benefits of Wegovy or Zepbound, with none of the muscle-wasting drawbacks. A drug that could truly sculpt the body, melting away fat while fortifying muscle and bone. This was the next evolution. But it also tacitly admitted the fundamental flaw in the first generation of these miracle drugs. The easy button came with fine print, and that fine print was written in the language of our own biology. It stated that you cannot cheat the fundamental need for nourishment and physical stress to maintain a strong, resilient body. The doctor's office of 2026 looked very different for a patient on weight loss medication. The conversation was no longer just about the number on the scale. It was about protein intake, calculating grams per kilogram of body weight. It was about prescribing specific exercises, squats, deadlifts, push-ups. It was about scheduling regular body composition scans. The miracle had become a high-maintenance, medically intensive protocol. It required more discipline, more knowledge, and more effort from the patient than ever before. For millions of people, this was a difficult pill to swallow. They had signed up for a simple solution, only to find themselves enrolled in a complex, lifelong commitment to managing their body's very composition. This new understanding of the physical risks fundamentally changed the equation. It forced a global conversation not just about the price of these drugs, but about the true cost of the weight loss they delivered. And that led to the most surprising development of all, the search for an off-ramp. This search for an off-ramp became the single most important medical quest in the weight loss space between 2024 and 2026. Because for the first time, millions weren't just asking, "How do I lose the weight?" They were asking the far more complex question, "How do I keep it off without being tethered to a $1,000 a month injection for the rest of my life?" The rebound data was terrifying. Studies and countless personal anecdotes showed that stopping cold turkey was a recipe for disaster. The food noise didn't just return. For many, it came back like a roaring tsunami. The body's hormonal systems, suppressed for months or years, overcorrected with a vengeance. People reported feeling hungrier than they ever had before. And the weight, which had melted off so magically, piled back on with a cruel and demoralizing speed. It was a physiological and psychological trap. So, the brightest minds in medicine and biotech started working on the escape hatch. They realized the initial approach was all wrong. We had treated Wegovy like an antibiotic, you take it until the problem is gone. But obesity isn't an infection. It's a chronic, complex metabolic condition. The new thinking, the 2026 paradigm, frames these drugs not as a cure, but as a powerful catalyst. A temporary metabolic intervention. Think of it like a controlled demolition. The drug comes in and clears out the old dysfunctional structures, the insulin resistance, the constant cravings, the excess adipose tissue. But once the demolition is done, you can't just leave the site empty. You have to rebuild. And that rebuilding process, that is the off-ramp. The first and most critical component of this off-ramp is what's known as a structured therapeutic taper. It's the polar opposite of going cold turkey. Working with physicians, patients in 2026 are now put on sophisticated, multi-month tapering schedules. The dosage isn't just cut, it's strategically reduced, sometimes by micrograms, allowing the body's natural systems, ghrelin, leptin, insulin, to slowly, gently wake back up. The goal is to land the plane, not just cut the engines at 30,000 feet. This gradual reduction helps mitigate the shock to the system, resensitizing the body's own satiety signals, and preventing that catastrophic hormonal backlash. It's a delicate dance between pharmacology and physiology, and it requires intense medical supervision. But even a perfect taper isn't enough. which led to the second innovation, the concept of the minimum effective maintenance dose, or MEMD. The idea is that for some individuals, complete cessation might not be realistic or necessary. Instead, after the initial weight loss phase on a high dose, they transition to an ultra-low dose, perhaps taken once a month instead of once a week. This isn't for weight loss anymore. It's a maintenance protocol. It's just enough of the drug to keep the food noise at a whisper, not silenced, acting as a safety net while new habits are solidified. This approach makes the drug far more affordable long-term and reduces the potential for side effects, offering a sustainable middle ground between being fully on and fully off. It transformed the financial and physiological equation for millions. The third, and arguably most important, piece of the puzzle was the forced integration of behavioral science. The great irony of Wegovy was that it worked so well. It allowed people to lose weight without changing their underlying habits or addressing the psychological drivers of their eating. The drug did the work for them. The off-ramp strategy of 2026 corrects this. Now, it's standard practice for insurance and medical guidelines to mandate concurrent therapy during the weight loss phase. While the drug is quieting the biological noise, patients are required to engage in intensive cognitive behavioral therapy, nutritional coaching, and structured exercise physiology. The goal is simple. Use the window of opportunity created by the drug to rewire the brain, to build the mental and behavioral scaffolding that will remain long after the pharmacological scaffolding is removed. You learn to recognize emotional triggers, you learn to cook and eat for metabolic health, and you learn to build and maintain lean muscle mass, the body's metabolic engine. This has spawned an entire new industry of GLP-1 companion therapeutics. We're not just talking about an app that tracks your calories. We're talking about AI-driven coaching platforms that monitor your biometrics and adjust your diet in real time. We're talking about new fitness protocols designed specifically to counteract muscle loss, a major side effect of rapid weight loss. We're seeing the rise of metabolic clinics that don't just prescribe a drug, but manage a patient's entire journey, from the first injection to the final successful off-ramp. So, what is the final truth about Wegovy in 2026? It's that the drug itself was never the whole story. It was the prologue. It was the tool that shattered the old simplistic model of eat less, move more. It proved on a global scale that obesity was a powerful biological force, not a moral failing. But the real revolution wasn't the medicine. It was the system of care that was built around it out of necessity. In 2026, we understand that Wegovy is phase 1. It's the metabolic reset button. It's the circuit breaker that stops the downward spiral of weight gain and disease. It provides the space, the quiet, and the physiological runway for real change to happen. But the success, the lasting life-altering success, is found in phase 2. It's found in the taper, in the maintenance, in the therapy, in the new relationship you build with food and with your own body while the drug holds the chaos at bay. The question is no longer, should I take this drug? The question is, if I take this drug, am I ready to commit to the work of building the life I want to live after it? Because the drug can open the door, can show you what's possible. It can quiet the storm inside you, but it cannot walk through that door for you. The truth of Wegovy in 2026 is that it's not an endpoint. It's a starting line, the most powerful one humanity has ever had in the fight against obesity. But the race is still yours to run.